not for anything criminal. Really, it's more for something that's an uncomfortable truth. He was talking about the things which were true, which were going to happen, and nobody wanted to hear it. They didn't like it. It made them angry, and they wanted him dead for it. So some objectives for this chapter will be that we will be able to determine which choice Paul made when Festus asked him to stand trial in Jerusalem. We'll identify the things Paul had been teaching them in Asia Minor and Europe, which angered the Jews. We'll identify some uncomfortable truths that we identify in this lesson. So see, these are some of the things that Paul was teaching. He's still in Caesarea at the beginning of Acts 25. He was brought to Caesarea to stand trial before Governor Felix after he was assaulted in the temple in Jerusalem. If you remember, it was the Asian Jews, so it was the Jews from Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey, that were in Jerusalem for the feast. They made the accusations against Paul. They said that Paul was teaching against the people, the law, and this place. So they were in the temple, so they're talking that he was teaching against the people, the law, and the temple. Paul said that he's on trial before the resurrection of the dead. That's what he keeps claiming to everybody. And when we looked at Hebrews 8, Daniel 12, 1 Corinthians 15, we were able to establish that the resurrection of the dead happens when the old covenant power of the holy people is shattered, which happened to be after the Great Tribulation. And by looking at the scriptures, we were able to determine what Paul was saying and doing, what he was teaching, because all his letters pretty much talk about these same things. All the letters he wrote to those people in those areas contain these elements. He wasn't teaching anything illegal. It was just stuff nobody wanted to hear. Okay, he was telling them that was a great tribulation coming, and that there would be some great suffering that would be happening, and that there would also, in this tribulation, it would be on the Jews. It would be in Thessalonians, it talks about those who afflict you; they would be faced with affliction, and because the Christians were already being persecuted, but it was going to turn. The tables were going to turn. The Jews were going to go through this tribulation. The destruction, he was telling them that the temple was going to be destroyed because it really is no longer needed. He knows that Jesus is the Messiah. He knows that Jesus fulfills everything, and that the temple is going to be destroyed. It was what Jesus had taught in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and even John wrote a whole book about it in Revelation. So he was preaching that the destruction of the temple was going to be imminent. He also was telling the Jewish people that they would not be really left in the land anymore. There would be a desolation. The Jews would be pushed out of the land or killed. Certainly wouldn't be well received. That there was a coming judgment that was going to take place on them. God was going to judge the living and the dead. And they would be judged by this Jesus, who he keeps preaching is alive, which is the next point, the resurrection. He's preaching that Jesus is alive. He's going to judge the living and the dead, and they would experience a second death if they were not in him. They, basically the same thing Jesus taught, that he is the only way. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody gets to the Father except through him. Paul would be teaching the same exact stuff. And the Jews in Asia and anywhere else that heard those things did not particularly care for it. So he was put on trial, and nobody was able to bring any charges against him that actually were able to stick, that were criminal charges, right? They could say, well, he's talking about, the destruction of the temple. And what did he do? So every time they try to keep making a point that he's doing something that is deserving of death, like the Romans are like, we don't know what you're talking about, putting him to death for this stuff that you're saying. It doesn't add up to a death sentence. It doesn't even add up to imprisonment. He's like, the guys did nothing wrong. It looks like you guys are bickering about the internal workings of your religion. So Felix decides to keep Paul in jail, and every so often Felix meets with him. This is from Acts 24. Every so often Felix meets with him and basically asks for a bribe, saying, hey, listen, Paul, if you want to get out, just give me some money, I'll get you out of here. And I imagine that, Felix has this situation on his hand. He's got a Roman citizen in custody who he can't set free because the Jews will kill him. The Jews have remember they made a vow to kill him. They want to kill him. They want him dead. And he has to keep him safe, but he doesn't want necessarily to keep him there because he's got no charges on him. So I imagine him asking Paul for a bribe would be like, hey, Paul, do you want to get out of here? All you need to do is this. And then he'd be free and clear of his own conscience to let Paul out. And, wouldn't have to really explain to anybody, because it would be like a an understanding between him and Paul that I'm going to let you go if you pay me. And Paul never took the bait. He never asked to be set free. Paul would rather sit there and suffer for 2 years with iron chains on his wrists and his ankles, awaiting however long it was going to take. You know, he had no idea he was going to be there for 2 years, which he ended up being there before eventually Felix gets recalled to Rome because he's not doing such a great job as the governor. Apparently the Jews are complaining a lot about him. He gets recalled back to Rome, and now Rome sends Porcius Festus out there. He's the new governor of the region when Acts 25 starts here. Okay. Acts 25. Now, 3 days after Festus had arrived in the province, he went up to Jerusalem from Caesarea. So here he is traveling up to Jerusalem to meet with the Jews at Jerusalem. And the chief priests and the principal men of the Jews laid out their case against Paul, and they urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he summon him to Jerusalem because they were planning an ambush to kill him on the way. All right, so the new governor goes to Jerusalem to meet with the Jews. And this is like a political move, right? Like, I'm the new governor in the land. I got to go meet my constituents. Let me go out to Jerusalem and meet like this whole culture of people that are very, very, they're very prominent in the land. He's got to meet with these people. So he meets with their leaders. It's a very political move. And they bring up the case of Paul. This is the same Paul, like I said, that they wanted to kill so badly 2 years ago that 40 of them took a vow to not eat or drink until Paul was dead. So I imagine they must be very hungry at this point, right? Like, at some point they stopped that vow and they had to break their vow, and they've got to be super angry about breaking their vow. That can't be cool with them. So now they have a new governor, and the first thing, or one of the things they bring up is, hey, listen, this Paul guy that you have in custody, how about you bring him back to Jerusalem? All right. And they're conspiring, obviously. They want him there. They want him dead still. If they kill Paul, basically they think or they feel that all their problems are going to go away, right? They're not going to have this guy doing these things, and they don't have to deal with this prisoner who's still, kind of on their mind, and who gave them who they made a vow to kill and they didn't kill. So like, if he just goes away, then everything else just kind of goes away, and then we can eat, drink, and be merry again. Paul's like this.
Doing anything right now.
No. Well, no, he's not doing anything except for the fact that he's alive and they want him dead. Like, he's angering them by the fact that they couldn't kill him. Like I said, who knows how long they waited before they finally took a morsel of food and drink again, because they couldn't get to him anymore because he was moved to Caesarea. And that had to be, something that angered them, because they made a vow to kill him. There was 40 of them that were going to ambush him on the road as they moved him. They were going to kill him. It was not a thing that was going to be left to chance. With 40 people dedicated to the death of one guy, they were going to succeed. That was the mindset. He's got to be eliminated. So here he's being asked to bring Paul to Rome, and the political pressure that he must have faced at this time must have been a lot, right? Because he's the new governor in town. He's got a population of people all asking for Paul, who's his criminal, and they want him to be brought to them so that they can try him. And really, they're conspiring amongst themselves. Hey, listen, and on the way we'll kill him, right? So Festus does not know what is going on with this case. The Bible does not say that he had any knowledge of the way like Felix had. Felix knew about the way. It doesn't say here that Festus had any understanding of that. I mean, that Felix had any understanding of that. In fact, between the two of them, I get confused. Felix was knowledgeable of the way, but Festus was all new to this, apparently. But he wasn't stupid. All right, this is what Festus replies with. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So let the men of authority among you go down with me. And if there is anything wrong about the man, let them bring charges against him. All right, so Festus, like I said, he's not knowledgeable of the way, but he does know Roman law. He knows enough to know that Paul is a Roman citizen in a Roman city awaiting a Roman trial. Okay, he's not in the custody of the Jews. He's in his custody. He's not going to turn over his prisoner to the Jews so they can do what they want with him. Like, it becomes his problem. Like, he's got to answer for the moves he makes. So Festus is willing to hear the charges and decide the case for the Jews. He does not give in to the political pressure that they're applying on him to bring Paul to Jerusalem. Instead, he follows the law, which is he is entrusted to do, to protect and defend, his constituents. Really, that's the main purpose of government. And if they tell you that their job is to control you, their job is to protect and defend you for like the common defense for us. But Rome had been a republic, so just like we are now, they deteriorated out of a republic into a totalitarian form of government under Caesar. But I imagine some remnants of the republic still remained. People still had rights. Paul still had his rights. The laws still had to be followed. He couldn't just move this prisoner and send him into, to the lion's den without some sort of due process for Paul. After he stayed among them not more than 8 or 10 days, he went down to Caesarea, and the next day he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. When he had arrived, the Jews had come down from Jerusalem, stood around him, bringing many and serious charges against him that they could not prove. So there's no specifics about what the actual charges were here in this chapter, but we know the Jews made many serious allegations against him, and that they didn't succeed in proving any of the allegations. They had no proof that Paul committed any offense. Kind of like what our Attorney General Barr just said about like the voter fraud, that there's no proof of voter fraud. But here, these guys actually didn't have any proof. Anyway, Paul argued in his defense, saying, "Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. But Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, said to Paul, 'Do you wish to go up to Jerusalem and there be tried on these charges before me?'" Okay, so Festus gives Paul the option, right? Do you want to go to Jerusalem? I think Paul remembers the 40 men that had made a vow to kill him, like his nephew told him, like the guys who are vowing to kill you. He probably figures that they're also still very, very hungry, if not for food, for his death, right? So what do you think he wants to do? Do you think he wants to go to Jerusalem to stand trial before all these people? No, he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to go there. Instead, he says this: "I'm standing before Caesar's tribunal, where I ought to be tried. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything for which I deserve to die, I do not seek to escape death. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar." Then Festus, when he had conferred with his council, answered, "To Caesar you appealed, to Caesar you shall go." It was a big deal. I mean, here's Festus, a new governor in town, has this wild case with Paul, and he brings these charges. He gives Paul the option to go to Jerusalem. He's probably expecting the Paul to be like, "Oh yeah, okay, I'll go. These are my guy, my people. I'll go to Jerusalem." He's like, "I appeal to Caesar." It's probably the last thing I think Festus expected to hear. Like, I'll throw myself at the mercy of, basically the king, like whoever the ruling Caesar is, which was Nero at the time, who doesn't have a great reputation today. We'll talk a little bit about him later, but I'm going to appeal to Caesar. So Festus is kind of like, all right, hold on a second. And he turns to his advisors and he's kind of like, can he do that? Like, can he go appeal to Caesar? And like, yeah, he can go to this. And then Festus has to turn around and be like, okay, you appeal to Caesar you will go. So that's the next move. Now, in some days, Agrippa the king and Bernice arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. All right, now this is not the same Agrippa who put James to death in Acts 12. That was his father. So this is like Agrippa Jr. Okay, if you remember Agrippa, the other one, he got eaten by the worms. Yeah, he was standing before the people, preaching and teaching, and they were like, "Oh, you are so great. You're like a god." And the next thing you know, like worms. Yeah. He must have had a big tapeworm or two. Acts 12. I wasn't there. I didn't witness it. It's only what the Bible says. He was eaten by worms. You gotta make for it what you can. I have no idea how it actually happened, but it was worms that ate him. Okay. Yeah, so that's what happened. So here is Agrippa, his son, and he's there with Bernice, his sister. So Agrippa is king. He's not now like Agrippa's the king, but he's not really like the ruler. You know, he's the king in like the subservient kingdom. All right, if it makes sense to you. So Rome is the ruling kingdom. They have control over everything going on in Judea. So Agrippa is like the king of Judea, but only if Rome says so. And Rome appointed him there anyway. They made him the king. You know, he's basically like, you know, a vassal king. He's just doing, you know, whatever Rome says. He's a figurehead. Yeah. Okay. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, "There is a man left prisoner by Felix. And when I was in Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal, and I ordered that the man should be brought. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed. Rather, they had certain points of dispute with him about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead, but who Paul asserted to be alive." All right, so here's again the one charge that we know that was levied against Paul consistently was this idea of the resurrection. All right, so Paul again is telling everybody apparently about Jesus being alive, witnessing this first resurrection. That's part of his consistent message. And that seems to be the main point of contention that it keeps following him everywhere. But there's a large group of Jews, the Pharisees, who do believe in the resurrection. So every time Paul brings up this resurrection idea, it causes an internal fighting amongst the Jews too, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees start like bickering about the resurrection because the Sadducees do not believe in the resurrection, but the Pharisees do, and they're both within this ruling Jewish council, both these sects. So every time that comes up, I got to picture just them like, no, you know, just start, battling it out. But Festus continues. Being at a loss on how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem and be tried there regarding them. But when Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, "I would like to hear the man myself." "Tomorrow," said Festus, "you will hear him." All right, Festus must actually have been very happy to hear Agrippa say that, because he's probably hoping that Agrippa could shed some light on this situation. All right, yeah, you're the Jewish king. You go listen to what Paul has to say, and maybe you can tell me what the charges are that I could like send him to Rome with. Like, it doesn't look good when the governor sends a prisoner to Rome and goes, "I don't even really know what he's charged with. Here you go." Like, that's not going to be good. So maybe you can help me out, Agrippa. Maybe you can figure this out. Tell me what I'm charging this guy with, so that when I send him to Rome, I don't look like such a fool. So on the next day, Agrippa and Bernice came with great pomp, which means it was like, like a lot of fanfare at the arrival of these two. And they entered the audience hall with the military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Then at the command of Festus, Paul was brought in. And Festus says, "King Agrippa and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. But I found that he had done nothing deserving death, and as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. But I have nothing definite to write to my lord about him." All right, so that's the issue. Paul appeals to Caesar, and Festus doesn't know what to charge him with. He doesn't know what to write to the Caesar about him. He's like, why am I even charging this guy? What is the charges? Why is he even a prisoner? In reality, all of this is playing out according to God's providential plan. And if you remember, only a few chapters earlier, God had promised Paul that you will now be presenting a case before Caesar. And this also goes back to the promise made to Paul when he was first knocked off his horse and blinded, saying that you will see how much you have to suffer for my behalf. I'll send you before leaders and officials and kings. So this is all what's taking place. God's plan here is just unfolding, a little bit at a time. And this is what happens if you remember in the book of Genesis. We've seen something similar happen to Joseph when he was imprisoned. He was sold into slavery by his brothers. I'm sure he didn't think it was all that great, but he gets sold into slavery, ends up in Egypt as a slave, serves there quite some time as a slave, eventually shows his competence in being able to interpret dreams, rises all the way up to the rank of second in command of all of Egypt, which was all by God's plan, because God was going to send his whole family, the ones that sent him into, sold him into slavery, his brothers, he was going to send them there for food when the famines came. And here's Joseph now in charge of all the land and able to provide his family with food. Everything worked out according to God's plan, although I'm sure many of those years were not very pleasant for Joseph as he, suffered in a prison. Yeah, being thrown in a hole ain't so much fun. So you can see sometimes God's plan for people in their lives doesn't always entail, the super blessings that many of the TV preachers say will happen in your life. If you're with God and you give me money, he's certainly going to bless you. It doesn't always work like that. It didn't work historically, and it's certainly not working for Paul. Paul didn't have the life of luxury, rising to the top of speaking to the Caesar. He had to do it, he got brought to Rome as a prisoner, though God kept his promise, you will be going to Rome. He didn't know he'd be going there in chains, right? Okay. Therefore, I have brought him before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him, and it is. It is unreasonable for anybody to send a prisoner somewhere without having some piece of paper which says the charge, right? Like, why do you have a prisoner if there's no charge? He couldn't have made that. He couldn't have made any case if he doesn't have a charge to present. So that's why he's talking to Agrippa. That's what he's hoping Agrippa can provide here. And that's where it picks up in Acts 26. This is where Acts 25 actually ends. It ends with Festus thinking it's unreasonable to send a prisoner without charging the man. So what we see happening in our country at this specific time, honestly, I have to bring this up because it's like nothing I've ever seen before. I mean, it's December 5th, right? 2020. So we're in like a time window where, like, if this video is out here like for years, they won't even know what window of time we're in. But we're in this short window of time from the end of the election of 2020, which was, in November. We're now in December, and in January, we will know who our president is. And we don't have any clue as to how all this is going to play out right now. And there are many Christians who are hesitant to get involved in politics or to talk politics or to know about politics. And I know, personally, after having run for sheriff, that it can be a distraction. It was a major distraction for me getting that involved. You have to go canvassing through neighborhoods, getting signatures, making appearances, and doing all these different things that are just super distracting to your faith. So it wasn't necessarily healthy for me, but I tried to make, the message of Christ the center of what I was doing. So this way it wouldn't get too far away from me. And it wasn't very well received by everybody. But anyway, the point is that we cannot, as Christians or not as whoever we are in this country, we cannot be ignorant of politics. We cannot pull back from what is going on in the political landscape. We need to know our rights, as Paul knew his rights. Okay, Paul knew he had the right to appeal to Caesar. He didn't just say, "Oh well, as the Lord wills, so it will happen to me." And now let me just not talk. Let me not say anything. Let me not do anything. Let me just sleep in the cell all day and let things just unfold. Like, no, he had to play a role in things, but he knew his rights, and he had the right to appeal to Caesar, and he used his right. And Rome was a republic at some point in time. They gave their people rights. And the point is that you don't get into politics actually to be an authority in this country. You actually are the authority when you're not in government, all right? The people are the authority in this country. We are a republic. We are a constitutional republic. And Rome was this also. Rome was a constitutional republic. They eventually eroded into a totalitarian government where the Caesar ended up having all the powers. And eventually we will end up there also, unless we stand up and we claim our rights, the natural rights which God has endowed to every man, that no man can take away. Unless we stand on those things which our founding fathers made sure that they established and enshrined in written documents so we wouldn't lose them. Unless we're willing to stand like they stood, we're going to lose them. And once you lose them, you'll have to fight harder than you would have to fight today to get them back. As I said, we the people of the United States, we are the rulers of the republic. And we really ought to start acting like it. If we lie down and accept tyranny, then we will live in a totalitarian government where we have no say whatsoever, and elections are just in your face a fraud. They won't even care that you know that it is. And it seems like that today already. It seems like they don't even care that we know that it's fraudulent. So we must know our rights as Paul knew his rights as a Roman citizen. And we, fortunately, have the right to bear arms in this country, which means that, like, our founding fathers established it in a written document that nobody could take that away. Nobody. And that's what sets us apart from every other country in the world. If we get invaded by a foreign country, they know that they don't just face a military, they face a people who are armed also, and they don't know who is armed where. All right. Paul had the right to appeal to Caesar. Paul makes his appeal to Caesar. As Paul is standing trial, we talked about this a little bit before, the Caesar ruling is Nero, okay? Do you guys know who Nero is in terms of who he is in, like, the book of Revelation? No, Nero is way after Jesus. Nero is the beast of Revelation. When people talk about the beast of Revelation and 666, Nero is that guy, all right? He's not a good guy. He's probably the last person you'd want to appeal to. Paul does this. Paul appeals to him. And I know it's not necessarily going to be well received because some people are still looking for the beast today and like the 666 of today. But when you look at the ancient writings, it's pretty well established who Nero is, so long as we have eyes to see. We have to actually look in the direction of some of these uncomfortable truths, because people want to feel like everything in the Bible is written for them today, not for them, but to them today. Sure, it's all for us, right? Because we all gain benefit from what's written there, but we're not the recipients of what was written. It wasn't written to the church in West Islip. It's to 6 or 7 churches rather in Asia Minor 2,000 years ago. And just because they call it a New Testament doesn't mean it's new. It's 2,000 years old, which means it's ancient history. Okay, anything 2,000 years old is ancient. It's the same time frame as when people were worshiping Zeus. Okay, it's that long ago. All right, so this is what we have written in Apollonius. This is what Apollonius of Tyanus said. He's quoted as saying this, and this is taken from the book of the Life of Apollonius of Tyana, from the 2nd and 3rd century. It was a biography of this guy, okay? And this is what he says. In speaking of Nero, Apollonius of Tyana states, "A tyranny has been established in this city so harsh and cruel that it does not suffer men to be wise. And let not anyone think it foolish so to adventure along a path which many philosophers are fleeing from. For in the first place, I do not esteem my human agency so formidable that a wise man can ever be terrified by it. And in the second place, I would not urge upon you the pursuit of bravery, unless it were attended with danger. Moreover, in traversing he more of the earth than any man yet has visited, I having seen hosts of Arabian and Indian wild beasts, but as to this wild beast, which the many call a tyrant, I know not either how many heads he has, nor chap, whether he has crooked talons or jagged teeth, In any case, this monster is said to be a social beast to inhabit the heart of cities. Yet he is so much wilder and fiercer in his disposition than animals of the mountains and forests, that whereas you can sometimes tame and alter the character of lions and leopards by flattering them, this one is only roused to greater cruelty than before those who stroke him, so that he rends and devours all alike. Okay? Again, he's talking about, he's telling us basically that Nero was referred to as the beast in their writings. All right, this guy's not a Christian. He has no clue about what Revelation says about him. He attests to Nero being called the beast, more wild than any wild beasts, which is not by accident that you can make these connections today, that some of these documents have survived today, that you can, connect dots. And then the meaning of 666. Now, I'm not an expert in understanding numbers and how they make a connection with like metaphors or anything like that, but the Christian Research Institute had this good article that I thought we should read. The article is entitled, "What is the meaning of 666? Multitudes today assume that 666 is a number representing a modern day beast about to be revealed. Placing the beast in the 21st century, however, may well pose insurmountable difficulties. First, John, the author of Revelation, told a first century audience that with wisdom and insight, they would be able to calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666, Revelation 13:18. Obviously, no amount of wisdom and insight would have enabled a first century audience to calculate the number of a 21st century beast. It would have been cruel and dangerously misleading for John to suggest to first century Christians that they could identify the beast if, in fact, the beast was a 21st century individual or institution. Furthermore, unlike today, transforming names into numbers, which is gematria, I don't know how to pronounce that, was common in antiquity. For example, in the lives of the 12 Caesars, Roman historian Suetonius identifies Nero by a numerical designation equal to a nefarious deed. This numerical equality, I'm not going to pronounce that word, is encapsulated in the phrase, count the numerical values of the letters in Nero's name and in murdered his own mother, and you will find their sum is the same. In Greek, the numerical value of the letters in Nero's name, Greek Neverwin, English transliteration is Neron, totaled 1,005 letters, as did the numbers in the phrase murdered his own mother. This ancient numerical cryptogram reflected the widespread knowledge that Nero had killed his own mother. Finally, while Nero in Greek totaled 1,005, the reader of John's letter familiar with the Hebrew language would recognize that the Greek spelling of Nero Caesar transliterated into Hebrew equaled 666. Moreover, the presence in some ancient manuscripts of the variation in which 666 is actually rendered as 616 lends further credence to Nero as the intended referent. The Hebrew transliteration of the Latin spelling of Nero Caesar totals 616, just as the Hebrew transliteration of the Greek, which includes an additional letter N, English transliteration N equals 50, renders it 666. Thus, two seemingly unrelated numbers lead you to the same doorstep, that of the beast named Nero Caesar. 21st century believers, like the first century counterparts, can be absolutely certain that 666 is the number of Nero's name, and that Nero is the beast who ravaged the bride of Christ in his historical milieu that included 3.5 years of persecution. In the end, Peter and Paul themselves were persecuted and put to death at the hands of this beast. Indeed, this was the only epoch in human history in which the beast could directly assail the foundation of the Christian church, of which Christ himself was the cornerstone. It's quite a lot. But that was just two quick searches, I did on the internet to find information about who Nero was and what he was and everything like that. And seems, whoever wrote this article obviously is much smarter than I. I would never have been able to come up with all this stuff, but it certainly makes sense once I look into what everything there actually means that he says. You know what I mean? If you figure out what he's talking about and how they believed in the numbers and being able to assign numbers to names and stuff, it makes sense. Especially when This is what it actually says in Revelation 13:18. It calls for wisdom. All right, to be wise. If anyone has insight, let him calculate the number of the beast, for it is man's number. His number is 666. Just so happened that Mr. 666 was reigning at the time when the Roman Jewish War started and ended up in the desolation of all of Jerusalem, the judgment on Jerusalem. All right, now I know Nero being the beast may not sit well with many people in today's modern church. It's one of those uncomfortable truths that can get you persecuted because it makes people angry. When people hear things that they don't ordinarily hear, or they haven't been taught before, or they haven't been instructed on, and it doesn't go with what is popular and common, it makes people angry. It makes them want to hurt you. It makes them even want you dead, like they wanted Paul dead when he was saying similar things about his generation. All right, and there are many uncomfortable truths in the world which will not be received well by those who hold fast to their opinions. But I'll tell you the truth. As Romans 3:4 says, let God be true and every man be a liar. Okay? What you find in the Bible is what is true. I don't even care what any man says, or what any man says that they know because they're smarter than me to be true. So I must accept it as true. If God says something, then that's what is true. And I'm going to go through some of the uncomfortable truths that are written in the Bible, that we can have an idea of the things that actually are popular, that go against what's popular in today's teachings that are actually still true. One of the things is that all Bible prophecy has been fulfilled, and that's not going to rub people the right way, but all the scriptures, including the New Testament, are actually ancient history. There are none that have gone, there are no prophecies that have not gone fulfilled. Like I said, none of the New Testament letters were written to us. If I see in a letter that but Paul writes a letter, I'm going to send Timothy to you with something to bring you relief. I'm not going to sit in my house and await the arrival of Timothy, right? I understand Timothy's not coming today, okay? Because it was 2,000 years ago that Timothy was sent with a letter or something else. But we can glean the New Testament for wisdom, insight, and understanding. Absolutely, that's what it's there for. But we cannot go to it to say, well, Hitler or Hillary Clinton or even Donald Trump is the beast of the system. Like that doesn't apply to us anymore. The beast was Nero, and all the imagery associated with the book of Revelation was something that the first century believers would have easily understood. They had idioms in their day that we're unfamiliar with. Like when we say it's raining cats and dogs, if I were to travel back in time and tell somebody in Rome, hey, it's raining cats and dogs, they may be like, oh, dogs and cats falling from the sky? But it's not literal, right? That's an idiom that we understand. It's heavy, heavy, heavy rain. So when they had their own idioms and we read them today, we are 2,000 years removed from that culture. And if we're not going to make the time to try to attempt to understand those, we will consistently be misled by a lot of what they understood very easily. All right, our meaning and our understanding cannot always apply to what it meant to them and what they understood it to be. And I'm not going to go into a list of those because I couldn't make an exhaustive list and I tried, and that would be a whole lesson in itself. Anyway, the next thing I want to say is that the earth is actually central to everything. God made this place super special in his eyes, and he actually sits right on top of it. This diagram here shows you actually how biblical cosmology is represented. This is what it says in the Bible about the way cosmology is. And I have a link there if anybody ever wants to go check that out. There's over 200 scriptures that support the idea that the earth is flat, stationary, so it doesn't move, it doesn't spin, it's not spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, which is faster than the speed of sound. And at some point, if you figure it, if you're walking from north to south and going to the equator, you have to cross a threshold where all of a sudden you break the sound barrier, which just, it doesn't make any sense. The Bible makes sense. And let every man be true, be false and a liar, because God is true. God says there's a firmament. Firmament is a solid iron like beaten out dome over the earth, and it separates the waters above from the waters below. And honestly, this is something I very reluctantly came to believe. I did not want to believe it. I tried to prove this wrong, and I couldn't. The more effort I tried, the harder it became. The higher I went to see if I could see a curve, I could never find one. Okay. The only way I would assume that what I had known of the shape of the earth prior was just to assume that everything I had been told was true and never actually known as true for something that made sense to me or that I could witness for myself. On the contrary, everywhere I went, whatever I did, I saw a flat horizon rising up to meet me eye level. It never dipped over. As a result, I had to succumb to the fact that I was misled and I was taught a lie as a child. And as I said, there's over 200 verses that attest that our earth is the center of everything and that God is actually, you know, in a physical place, what we call the heavens of heavens, which I'll get to into a minute. But there's other uncomfortable truths that go along with that. I mean, the fact that the moon gives its own light, the fact that once you start to see this as what it is, that there is no such thing as outer space. And actually, NASA, interestingly enough, says that we can't leave our atmosphere because of something they call the Van Allen radiation belts, which they can't get through, but they claim to have gotten through in 1969 when they went to the moon. But now they say they can't get through them because they're actually referring to what the firmament is. They can't get past it. All right. There's no such thing as a force called gravity. Everything that you witness, whether it's rising or falling, can be attributed very simply to buoyancy and density, very scientific things that you can test that are repeatable and testable. That Jesus ascended into the sky bodily. Now, this is something that people have a hard time actually picturing. I mean, but this is what the Bible says. Jesus rose up into the sky, into the heavens, and that's where he is. He floated up beyond the firmament through a cloud into what's beyond there. Now, if we go with what the world tells us, then he's in a body floating out in space somewhere. And I always had a hard time reconciling this before I understood. It's like, where did his body go? If he was in a body, where is it? Right? This biblical model makes sense that there is something above the waters that are outside the dome, and that there's another place where he went, okay, which is seated right in the north above the earth, because the earth is the everything of creation. That's what God has centered upon. Everything revolves around the earth, above the earth, in the firmament. And the last uncomfortable truth that I'm going to talk about today is the fact that Jesus actually is Lord. And that is an uncomfortable truth for many people. He is the King of Kings. He watches over us and he judges us. He gives to those that he wants to give eternal life. And those people are the ones that are in him. They're the ones that love him and follow him and choose to give up their lives to go along the route of following him. And as I said earlier, nobody gets to the Father except through him. And that's a difficult truth even for Christians to believe. Okay, but this is what is true. These are some uncomfortable truths. And when you hear these things, it can cause what I've had to go through often enough. The idea of like, you know, like a conflict in the mind to struggle with this stuff. Cognitive dissonance would be like the term for it. Where you struggle because how can this all be right? But the fact is that he is Lord, which means he is king, whether you accept him as not to make him the king in your life. If you accept to follow him or not in your life is going to be your choice. But either way, you will be answerable to him. You see, you are always answerable to the king, whether or not you believe the king is actually king or not. Okay? Because I could believe that Donald Trump is president or not, but either way, he's still the one making the rules in this country right now. Okay? Same thing when Jesus is ruling, he's still ruling whether or not you believe it or not. Okay? All right. Back to Acts 25. Paul is in custody because of what he was teaching in regards to Jesus. He's in custody because of what he was teaching regarding the coming kingdom and the resurrection of the dead. And he angered so many people that they wanted him dead. Even after 2 years away in prison in Caesarea, the Jews in Jerusalem still wanted him dead. Paul's message was an extremely uncomfortable truth for the Jews. Yes, speaking uncomfortable truths today may cause people to mock you, make fun of you, laugh at you, unfriend you on Facebook, which has happened to me even by family members who I love dearly, out of their embarrassment of being associated with me. And Paul is facing actually the death penalty for his uncomfortable truths that he's speaking. Paul preached the gospel wherever he went. And part of the gospel includes these uncomfortable truths that he was preaching around Europe and Asia Minor. Again, the tribulation was coming. Paul taught that the Jews in Jerusalem would experience the great tribulation, and they did. When they attempted to actually go to war with Rome to gain their independence, right? They wanted to break from Rome, and they suffered through famines and pestilence and death at their own swords, even before Rome was able to get through the walls. They were killing each other off. Paul was preaching the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and again, this came to be just a decade later. They may not have wanted to hear it, but it was happening. Desolation, Paul told them that the Jewish nation was about to cease to exist and they would no longer be the holy people in the Holy Land. And a decade later, the Jews faced a genocide of over 1 million of them being killed and not able to dwell in Jerusalem again. The temple has never been rebuilt since that time and never will. The priesthood and the genealogical records, they've been destroyed too, and they're needed to establish a priesthood. You need genealogical records to establish a priesthood. They're destroyed. Everything's gone. Deliverance. Paul actually told them that you could be delivered from this. It's good news. You can get good news. You're delivered from this if you just follow Jesus. They didn't like that. It means turning their back on everything they had. They didn't want to do that, and this good news still isn't applicable today. Every one of us can still receive Jesus for our eternal life if we choose to. Judgment. Paul taught that there was going to be a soon coming judgment on the world, on the living and the dead, that Jesus would come again to judge the living and the dead, the second coming. Jesus came back in a cloud of judgment on Jerusalem, which was the harlot city of Revelation. Resurrection. Paul taught that the physical dead would be resurrected and some would go to eternal life and some would experience a second death. And Paul was simply echoing the words that we find in Daniel 12:2, which were, and many of those who slept in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting contempt. This is what the Pharisees even believed to be true. So again, it became a point of contention between the Pharisee and the Sadducee whenever Paul brought this up, and he would bring it up. And Paul's preaching about the resurrection of the dead would have aligned with everything found in Daniel, including Daniel 12:7, where it says, and the power in the hand of the consecrated people is finished. When the power in the hand of the consecrated people is finished, scattered to pieces, all these things would be finished. So when the holy people, the consecrated people, the set apart people, which are Jews in Jerusalem, when it comes to an end, when they're scattered, what they had in their hand was God's word. When they ended up being scattered and spelled all over the place, then all those things that had been previously mentioned, like in Daniel 12:2, the resurrection part, would have already taken place. All right, yes. This uncomfortable truth probably still angers people today. The Jews wanted to kill Paul because they are things that he would have been teaching and preaching as he traveled throughout the Roman Empire that would have rubbed everybody the wrong way. And it will continue. He continued to preach and teach it. Even now, as we see him go to Rome, you'll see he even brings up the same stuff again. Consistently, you read his letters, it's the same stuff over and over again. And in closing, let's just say that be mindful when you hear new things from people that tell you stuff that you've never heard before, to not kill the messenger, but to check the message. And what the Bible says, you want to be like the Bereans, who were more noble than the Thessalonians, because they checked the Bible every time Paul taught to make sure that what they were being taught was true. So we want to test everything against Scripture. And as again, Romans 3:4 says, let God be true and every man a liar. Right? So let's just take our quick quiz here. When Festus asked Paul if he wanted to stand trial in Jerusalem, Paul said yes. Is that true? Did Paul want to go to trial in Jerusalem? No. What did he want to do? He chose to exercise his rights as a citizen and appeal to Caesar. Very good. What things was Paul preaching that angered the Jews? A, that the temple was going to be destroyed. B, that Jerusalem would be desolate. C, that the Jews would experience a great tribulation. D, that through faith in Jesus, the Jewish people could be delivered and from certain death and receive resurrection to eternal life. Or E, all of the above. Yes, thank you. And which one of these is not an uncomfortable truth discussed in this lesson? A, that Jesus is Lord. B, that the earth is flat and stationary. C, that Nero is the beast of Revelation. D, that the earth will be destroyed soon. Or E, that all prophecy has been fulfilled. D. Right, we didn't talk about the earth being destroyed. All right, very good. And again, please, as I close this out, don't kill the messenger. Thank you.